Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the weekly Torah portion discussion. And tonight we're going to be studying the portion of Shoftim. The word Shofet is a judge, Shoftim is judges. Its name comes from the beginning of the portion where God commands the Jewish people to appoint judges and police officers to enforce the law in every community and every city and every tribe. Hopefully we will be coming back to this idea, but first I want to go, this week's portion is loaded with commandments, very few stories, mostly rules and laws. And I want to devote the time to expanding on some of the laws appearing in this week's portion. So I want to share with you, the first one I want to talk is about prophecy. There is something called false prophets, but in addition to verifying a prophet to be a true, authentic prophet, there is another point which this week's Torah portion make, and that is that every human being, male or female, can reach the level of becoming their own themselves prophets. A prophet is not a gift that comes from God to a certain people, but rather it is something that a person can reach by himself to become a prophet. The purpose of prophecy is to receive God's words, God's message. After the destruction of the Second Temple, that practice ceased from existing. The concept of prophecy is gone from the Jewish people. But when Mashiach will arrive, or before the destruction of the Second Temple, a human being, every human being, can reach the level of connecting to God and be able to receive prophecy. And that's the point that I want to elaborate a little bit about. Here is the text. First, I'm going to read the text, then I will share with you some important points to that text. We are studying in the book, if you have the same book as I am, on the bottom of page, we're starting on page 1249, chapter 18, verse 14. Chapter 18, verse 14 reads the following. I'm going to read an entire section because I do feel that it's not being spoken enough about, and that's why I would like to take it apart and expand over it. These are the words that Moshe shares with the Jewish people. Again, chapter 18, verse 14. While these nations which you are about to take possession of listen to diviners of fortitudes, times and stick diviners, in your case, however, God your God has not given you things like these, but rather genuine prophets and the Urim Vetumim. He wants to distinguish the Jewish people from the rest of society, in particular the nations of the land of Canaan. They go after sorcerers, magicians, people who are future tellers. God hates those people, and therefore he wants us to obey God based on prophecy, or in the case of a community, a communal dilemma, they have the Urim Vetumim. Urim Vetumim is a breastplate that the high priest wore. It contained, made out of mostly gold, it contained 12 various precious stones in which the names of the 12 tribes were engraved. And whenever they needed to know, they would ask the high priest, and the letters in the breastplate will shine and give the proper answer. However, God continues, the Torah continues. God, you God, will establish a prophet like me, like Moses, from among you, from you brothers, and you must listen to him. What he's saying is that a prophet is not a God. A prophet is like a human being, flesh and blood, born to a human being. Just like me, Moses, who grew up in Egypt as an Egyptian for many years, a prophet is only someone who is among you, who was gifted with the ability to connect to God. We continue reading the text in the Torah. This is what you ask from God, your God, at Horeb. At Horeb, Horeb is another name for Mount Sinai. At the day of assembly, the day God gave us the Torah, saying, I don't want to hear the voice of God, my God, anymore, or see this great fire so that I will not die. Anybody who is familiar with the story of the Ten Commandments, we read when God starts speaking the Ten Commandments, the Jewish people almost fainted. They almost lost their mind. And they ran to Moshe shouting, please, you deliver God's words and let God speak to you. The only commandments that the Jewish people we heard directly from God were the first two. The remaining eight were said to Moshe. We witness as God speaks to Moshe, and Moshe delivered to the Jewish people. In other words, God reminds us that when we had an ability to establish a direct, a direct, straight relationship with God, we refused that. We got scared that it might be too powerful and we will die. God said to me, I continue in the text, God said to me, they have spoken well. I will establish for them a prophet like you from among you, their brothers. I will put my words into his mouth, and he will tell them everything that I command him. And then, if anybody does not listen to my words that he speaks in my name, I will punish him with death from heaven. God says, when on Mount Sinai they asked for Moshe to deliver the words of God, they spoke well, and therefore I am establishing a second line of communication. The first line of communication is the giving of the Torah that is written on scroll. The second line of communication we call prophecy. And prophecy is where a human being is chosen or is elevated to a point where he can be close to God so that God can deliver a message through him. And everyone must obey and accept the words of the prophet. I continue verse 20. We're almost done with this. But if a prophet, but if a prophet intentionally utters a word in my name, which I did not command him to say, or is speaking the name of other gods, that prophet must be put to death. So if someone is ordered by God to deliver a message, or someone deliver a message he was not asked to deliver, it is a capital punishment. If you will say to yourself, how will I know if a declaration was not said by God? How do we know if it's a true or false prophet? The answer is, if the prophet claims to speak in the name of God and the thing does not occur, and you see that it will never come about, then it is a declaration which God did not say. The prophet has spoken it to deceive you intentionally. Do not be afraid of him, and he should be put to death. This is the chapter dealing with prophets. Let me reiterate few points which I think are essential, and they are: number one, God chose to communicate with men directly. One form of communication is the Torah, in which God gives us his will and commandments. Another way and form of communication is through a human being called a prophet. When a prophet is asked to deliver a message, they are required, they have no choice. If they are able to see a prophecy, but were not ordered to deliver, They must keep it to themselves. Delivering a message to others without being asked is akin to false prophecy. And finally, how do we determine whether a prophet is a true prophet or a false prophet? You can see it in the there is a series of tests that are made before a prophet is proven to be a true prophet. One of them, as the Torah makes it clear, he must tell you something about the future which is positive. Let's say an abundance of rain, or someone will be blessed with a child, or there will be a successful war and the Jewish people will succeed. If it did not happen exactly to the T and dot as he commanded, as he prophesied, we know it's a false prophet. Now, if a prophet is prophesying about a negative upcoming event, for example, a drought, a famine, a pandemic that will happen, it is not a test because God may change his mind, and through Teshuvah we can change God's mind to remove the ailment or the curse. However, a blessing that's about to come upon the Jewish people under all circumstances that must follow regardless of our behavior. So if God granted me long life, if God granted me a blessing of a wealth or health or children or a spouse, etc., and a prophet delivers that message, then it must be fulfilled. And if it did not fulfill, it was not fulfilled, there is no other reason than that it was a false prophet. However, if the prophet is going to say something bad that's about to happen, someone will die, losing war, drought, famine, etc., even if it didn't happen, it is not necessarily a proof that the prophet was a false prophet. Rather, it might be that God changed his mind. This is the, so to say, the introduction to the idea of prophecy. I hope nobody has any questions because I want to get to the real points that I care to share. And that is, the Rebbe points out that these two forms of communication between God and the Jewish people can happen and at the simultaneously at the same time, and they each have a different purpose. And here is the way the Rebbe explains. Torah, the Rebbe points out that there is two ways in which Torah is superior to prophecy, and there are two ways in which prophecy is superior to Torah. Both are about to convey God's message. By the way, during King David's time, anybody who reads the Bible, there were a school of 4,000 prophets. King Saul, who was the king before David, had a school of prophets, and there were thousands upon thousands of students who were attending the college of becoming prophets, and they became prophets. Here is the Rebbe's viewpoint. The Rebbe points out that Torah is superior to prophecy in that A, Torah teaches the ultimate purpose of existence. Prophecy is a means to an end to encourage people to observe the Torah. The Torah is about the real purpose to our life and pleasing God. The prophecy is a means to an end to assist us and direct us and remind us how to serve God by following the Torah. Another superiority to the Torah is the Torah is constantly evolving and expanding through the innovative Torah ideas of the Jewish people. However, a prophet may not make any innovation of his own in the prophecy that he receives. The Rebbe says Torah, we read in the Torah, God says that we must live by Torah. Torah is like a living person that constantly evolves. we have a system, the 13 principles by which we, so to say, dig deep into the Torah and dive down deep into the ocean of Torah and find all the gems and all the treasures. So when we have today different methods of giving birth, when we have today questions that no one dreamt about before, about crossing the date line, for example, about crossbreeding animals, about creating a human being, etc. All that is actually found in the Torah. You just need to study the Torah properly to understand how to find it in the Torah. Prophecy, on the other hand, is exact words the way it came from God, the prophet must deliver. If he wants to be innovative and expand upon it and compare it to something else, for example, it is totally unacceptable. So in that way, Torah has superiority over prophecy. Number one, Torah is the purpose of our life, and prophecy is the means to an end, to encourage and assist us in serving God through the Torah. Number two, Torah constantly evolves to accommodate our day-to-day life and live with through a living Torah, whereas prophecy, the words of God, must be conveyed the way they were given to the prophet without any deviation. However, says the Rebbe, prophecy is superior to Torah in that there are two ways in which prophecy is superior to Torah. Number one, the Torah is inherently an incomprehensible godly wisdom, although it has been expressed in human terms. The prophet speaks to the people in a language to which they directly relate, so its immediate impact is greater. One superiority to prophecy is the Torah follows a certain language, certain terminology, certain method that it takes a while to adapt and understand. And sometimes after many years, we discovered that it means totally different than what we thought it is. I study Torah, the five books of Moses. Every week I study it again from year to year. I study it hundreds of times. And thank God, every time when I concentrate, suddenly I see that the Torah, the text reads much different than what I saw last year or 2 years ago. It's just amazing. But on the other hand, it is not as simple as a language. However, when a prophet is delivering a message, he must deliver it in the language of today so that we, the listeners, can exactly understand what he meant. In the Torah, when you study it today, you see what God means today. But in 50 years' time, my children or grandchildren, when they study the same text, they will understand it to mean totally something else. Prophecy is superior in the way that it is given to the current human being in their language and the simple comprehension. Another superiority to prophecy, what a Torah scholar perceives in the spiritual realms through the Torah will not necessarily materialize in the physical world. However, what a prophet predicts it will definitely come true in the literal sense. When you study Torah, sometimes it is, so to say, a very high in the spiritual realms, and it has no impact on the physical world we live in. Where when we deal with prophecy, it is about our day-to-day life, how to harvest the field, how to keep Shabbat, how to treat someone with dignity and respect, how to respond to a famine, how to deal with war, etc. So that prophecy is, so to say, all about our day-to-day life, where Torah is more of an esoteric concept, where not everything and not always it can be related down to earth in our day-to-day life. So this is the idea of prophecy in general that appears in this week's portion. A lot more can be said. And actually, I had many, many more points to be sharing, but I would like to save the time for other ideas. There is the way what the Talmud defines a prophet and what Maimonides, maybe in one word I would say, according to the Talmud, a prophet must possess the following. He must be a strong, physically strong human being, wealthy, wise, and humble. These are four traits that a prophet might possess before they can reach the level of prophecy. And again, we have in the Torah many, many women who are prophets. We have Deborah, we have Miriam, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. Sarah was a greater prophetess than Abraham, but they must possess all four. According to Maimonides, says the Rebbe, Maimonides is talking about a prophet must be a man who is able to conquer his evil inclination and his emotions. He control his behavior through his mind. And by the way, it is one of the 13 principles of faith of Jewish tradition that God communicates to human beings through prophecy, except that in the last 2,000 years we don't have it due to the fact that God has abandoned us, so to say, and He's allowed for His home to be destroyed. But until the destruction of the temple, people were able to devote themselves to God until they reach a point where God will speak to them directly. Some of the prophecy they prophesied was for themselves, and at times very few would be appointed as prophets for the rest of the community, like Jeremiah, Hosea, and the other prophets. So again, this is in general the idea of prophecy in Jewish tradition. Any questions? No questions. All right, I would like to move on. Now I want to get to the beginning of this week's portion. The words are Shoftim veShotrim. Judge, we are turning back to the start of this week's portion, chapter 16, verse 18. That's where it starts. Page 1236, if you have the same book as I use. The words are Shoftim veShotrim, judges and policemen. Titen lecha bechol she'arecha, you must place in all of your gateways, all of your city gateways. I'm going to read the English translation. You should appoint judges and police officers for yourself, for each of your tribes, in all your city gates that God, your God, is giving you. The words, there are many points to be discussed, and I don't want to get to others. There is one that I want to concentrate about, and that is your city gates. What those city gates are. So in ancient time, in order to fortify the community, in order to protect themselves from an enemy, every community will surround themselves with a wall so no one can conquer and kill people. And then they would come in from the gate. There will be a gate, an entrance to the town, and that gate would be locked up. They would close the gate at sunset and reopen it at sunrise. If you travel to Europe, in some ancient cities, I know in Italy for sure until today, there are communities that at sunset or a certain hour, they lock the gates of the town so no one can come in and out, and they reopen the gates in the morning. So anyone entering town had to have passed by the gates. And that's the literal explanation why the Torah commanding us to put judges and police officers at the gates of the city, because that's the entrance to town, so to say, controlling the entire town. But here we have, as everything else in Torah, a much deeper understanding. The following is the Shach ala Torah. Shach was a famous rabbi that wrote commentary on Code of Law, and the Code of Jewish Law, and he also put commentary on the Torah. This is the Shach ala Torah. This is what he says. The term gates here alludes to the gates of the body. He says the city, a human being, is a minor city. Each one of us is a city of gates. Gates are the openings that enable us to communicate with the outside universe. And therefore he says, the two eyes, the two ears, the nose, the mouth, and etc. And the verse teaches us that a person should place judges and police over all his bodily gates to ensure that only positive and kosher influence enter his body. Our human mind and heart is influenced by what we see, what we taste, what we smell, what we hear, etc. And these are the gates that enable communication between our body and other bodies and other human beings and the rest of the universe. Tell us the Torah, judges and police officers you must place in front of you gates, that each one of our body gates must be controlled and guarded so that if someone speaks Lashon Hara, we can shut our gate and say, I'm sorry, we're not letting it in. If somebody is not properly dressed or not properly behaving, we can shut our eye from seeing, saying we're not going to allow that image into our mind. If something is not kosher, we will not put it in our mouth, thus protecting our city, the small human being as a city, from getting impacted by the enemy, by poison, by negative influence that can harm the city. And that's why the Torah uses the word Shoftim v'Shotrim, judges and policemen, Titen lecha, place upon yourself, bechol she'arecha, in all your gateways, is referring, according to the Shach, not to the physical towns, but to the physical human being, or to the human being whose gates must be strictly guarded, protected, and to prevent from any stranger, unwanted stranger, of entering the gateway. One more this week's portion has so many lessons. If we continue the same on the same page, verse 19. So 16, 19, per page 1237, the Torah tells us the following: do not pervert justice, do not show favoritism, and do not take a bribe, even to judge correctly, for bribery blinds the eyes of the wise and perverts legitimate words. And now we continue with the famous verse, as Bob Landman mentioned, pursue justice by seeking a high quality court of justice. Justice, justice shall you pursue. But before, I want to talk a little bit about bribery. God tells us that bribery is solely unacceptable, even if we are accepting bribery for the sake of judging properly. Someone says, I'll give you an extra few dollars, and just make sure you do what's right. This is plain bribery, and it will blind the eyes, or so to say, the mind of the judge. There are countless of stories over the years. I shared many stories where people didn't know they accepted bribes because one of the litigants put money in their jackets, in their coats, or helped them without them knowing that he helped them, and that, so to say, blinded their eyes. They could not rule against them. But I want to share with you what the Rebbe very briefly shares with us, is that the evil again, we can apply it to the human being. We as human beings are blinded by being bribed with our own love for ourselves. Just like a judge cannot judge a relative. He must recuse himself because he is, so to say, bribed, and that will cause him blindness. He will not be able to rule properly if one of the parties is his relative. The same is a human being. If he is about to judge himself and decide what he's doing is right or wrong, or does he have the time, does he have the means, is it right for him to be excused or to excuse himself, he is usually being bribed and blinded. Therefore, the Rebbe is a big advocate and constantly spoke about the fact that every human being must appoint themselves a rabbi. Because if we are not going to appoint ourselves a rabbi to assist us with following Jewish law, we will be blinded by the love, by our self-love, and by the fact that we are blinded. That's the nature of the beast. That's why when it comes to a halachic question, a rabbi should not rely on his own knowledge, but should seek the help of another professional, another rabbi who is able to be free of, so to say, to be related, to be and by doing so, you will be able to rule properly. And that's the end of our discussion for tonight. I want to wish everyone Shabbat Shalom, and I want to say that